The war room of the Cretharian flagship was filled with the sound of laughter. Commander Vexthor stood at the center of the chamber, his purple scales gleaming under the bright lights as he replayed the human military footage for the 5th time. Around him, dozens of officers watched the screens with obvious amusement. On the display, human soldiers ran through training exercises on their colony world. They carried weapons that fired small metal projectiles, nothing like the plasma rifles the Cretharians used. Their armor looked thin and weak. When one human soldier tripped during the exercise and fell to the ground, the entire room erupted in fresh laughter. "Look at them," said Officer Krenzak, pointing at the screen with one of his 4 arms. "They cannot even run without falling over. How did such a species ever leave their home planet?" Vexthor studied the footage more carefully. He had fought in wars across 14 star systems. He had seen countless alien species, and he knew how to evaluate an enemy. These humans seemed particularly weak. Their bodies were small and soft. They had no natural armor, no claws, no biological weapons at all. Even their bones were fragile, breaking easily under stress. "Their gravity is barely half of ours," another officer commented. "Training in their conditions would be like a vacation for our soldiers." The Cretharian military prided itself on strength. Every Cretharian warrior was born into a family of warriors. They trained from childhood, their bodies hardened by the intense gravity of their home world. By the time a Cretharian soldier reached maturity, they could lift 3 times their body weight and survive wounds that would kill most other species instantly. Humans, by comparison, seemed like children playing at war. The footage changed to show human civilians going about their daily lives on Epsilon Prime, a small mining colony at the edge of explored space. There were families walking through streets, children playing in parks, workers operating mining equipment. The colony had a population of about 2,000 people. "How many human soldiers defend this colony?" Vexthor asked. 43, replied his intelligence officer. 43 military personnel protecting 2,000 civilians. They have basic defensive weapons and some automated turrets. Nothing that could challenge even one of our dropships. Vexthor nodded slowly. The Cretharian fleet had 6 warships and 3,000 trained soldiers. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. They only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago, the intelligence officer continued. They are newcomers to space. They do not understand how things work out here. This brought more laughter from the assembled officers. The Cretharians had been traveling between stars for over 500 years. They had built an empire that spanned dozens of systems. They had crushed every species that stood in their way. They also require sleep for 8 hours every cycle, added another officer. And they must consume water constantly or they become weak. Their biology is inefficient. Vexthor watched as the footage showed human soldiers changing shifts at a guard post. They looked tired even during peacetime. What would they look like in actual combat? How long could they possibly last? "Prepare the invasion force," Vexthor ordered. "We will take the colony within 1 day. It will be good practice for our newer soldiers." The officers saluted and left to prepare their troops. Vexthor remained in the war room, watching the human footage alone. Something about them puzzled him, though he could not quite identify what it was. They moved with purpose despite their physical weakness. They built their structures carefully. They seemed organized even if they were primitive. But organization meant nothing without strength. The Cretharians had learned this truth through centuries of conquest. The strong survived, the weak were conquered or destroyed. It was the natural order of the universe. On Epsilon Prime, Lieutenant Kyle Morrison sat in the colony's small command center, reviewing the same defensive plans he had reviewed 100 times before. He was 28 years old, young for a military officer, but he had trained hard and earned his position. Next to him, Sergeant Amy Parker checked their ammunition supplies. "We're low on everything," Amy said quietly. "If anyone ever attacks this place, we're going to have problems." Kyle did not answer. He was staring at a screen that showed long-range sensor data. There was something out there at the edge of the system. Ships. Big ones. "Amy," he said slowly, "I think those problems just arrived." The sensor screen updated, showing 6 massive vessels moving toward Epsilon Prime. They were unlike any human ships Kyle had ever seen. They were enormous, heavily armored, and moving fast. Amy came to look at the screen. Her face went pale. "That's not a human fleet." "No," Kyle agreed. "It's not. Within minutes, every military member on the colony was in the command center. They watched as the alien ships approached. Nobody spoke. They all understood what this meant. The communication system crackled to life. A deep, harsh voice spoke in perfect English, though the accent was strange. Human colony of Epsilon Prime. I am Commander Vexthor of the Cretharian Empire. You have one planetary rotation to surrender your colony to our control. If you refuse, we will take it by force. There is no need for violence. Submit now, and your people will be allowed to live as workers in our empire. Resist, and you will all die. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. The command center remained silent for several long seconds. Then Kyle stood up. He was not a tall man, and he knew he was not particularly strong compared to many humans, let alone whatever these Cretharians were. But he had taken an oath when he joined the military. He had promised to protect the civilians on this colony. Get me a direct line to that ship, he ordered. Kyle, Amy said carefully, we can't fight them. Look at those ships. We have 43 soldiers and some mining equipment. They probably have thousands of troops. I know, Kyle said, but we're not going to surrender without letting them know who we are. The communication line opened. Kyle spoke clearly into the microphone. Commander Vexthor, this is Lieutenant Kyle Morrison of the Epsilon Prime Defense Force. We have received your demand. Our answer is no. These people are under our protection. If you want this colony, you will have to come and take it. We will be waiting. He paused, then added something his grandfather had told him once from an old war back on Earth. We don't know how to quit. Kyle ended the transmission and looked at his fellow soldiers. They all looked scared. He was scared too. But fear was not the same thing as surrender. On the Cretharian flagship, Vexthor heard the humans' response and laughed. The other officers laughed too. These foolish humans actually thought they could fight. It would make the victory more satisfying. Begin the assault at dawn, Vexthor ordered. Show them what happens when the weak challenge the strong. The sun rose over Epsilon Prime in shades of orange and red. Kyle Morrison had not slept. None of the 43 human soldiers had slept. They had spent the entire night preparing for a battle they knew they could not win. The colony streets were empty now. Every civilian had been moved to the underground shelters, deep mining tunnels that the Cretharians might not find immediately. The children had cried. The parents had begged the soldiers to come with them. But Kyle and his team had a job to do. Amy Parker finished placing the last explosive charge beneath a building near the colony's main entrance. The buildings were not important anymore. The people were safe below ground. Everything above could be destroyed if it meant slowing down the enemy. All charges are ready, she reported through her radio. We can blow half the colony if we need to. Good, Kyle replied. He stood on top of the command center watching the sky. Because here they come. The Cretharian dropships descended like falling stars. There were dozens of them, each one carrying 50 soldiers. They landed in a wide circle around the colony, cutting off any escape routes. The hatches opened and the Cretharian warriors emerged. Kyle had seen pictures of Cretharians in the intelligence reports, but seeing them in person was different. They were massive, at least 7 feet tall, with thick purple scales covering their bodies. Each one wore heavy armor and carried weapons that glowed with blue energy. They moved with confidence like predators that had never known fear. The first wave of Cretharians marched toward the colony. There were at least 200 of them in this group alone. They did not bother with tactics or cover. They simply walked forward, knowing the humans could not stop them. Kyle waited until they reached the main street. Then he pressed the detonator. The explosion was enormous. 3 buildings collapsed simultaneously, falling onto the advancing Cretharians. Dust and debris filled the air. When it cleared, dozens of alien soldiers were buried under the rubble. The others had stopped, surprised by the attack. Fire! Kyle shouted. From windows, rooftops, and hidden positions throughout the colony, the human soldiers opened fire. Their bullets could not pierce the Cretharian armor easily, but they aimed for weak points, joints, visors, exposed areas. Some of the shots found their targets. Cretharian soldiers fell, but more kept coming. The Cretharians returned fire with their plasma weapons. The blue bolts of energy tore through walls and melted metal. A human soldier named Danny Cole was hit in the shoulder. The blast threw him backward, but he gritted his teeth and kept firing. Another soldier, Lisa Martinez, dragged Danny to cover while shooting her rifle with one hand. Fall back to the secondary positions. Kyle ordered. The human soldiers retreated through the colony, leaving behind more explosives and traps. Every street became a kill zone. Every building became a fortress. The Cretharians had superior weapons and armor, but the humans had spent all night turning their home into a maze of death. On board the flagship, Commander Vexthor watched the battle through his monitors. His amusement was fading. The initial assault should have taken minutes. It had been 2 hours, and his forces had only secured the outer edge of the colony. "How many casualties?" he demanded. 47 dead, 83 wounded, his officer reported. "The humans are using explosives and ambush tactics. They are not fighting in open combat." "Of course they are not," Vexthor growled. "They know they would lose in a fair fight. Send in more troops. Overwhelm their positions." The second wave of Cretharians entered the colony. They were more careful now, checking for traps and moving in coordinated groups, but the humans adapted. When the Cretharians stayed in groups, the humans used heavier explosives. When they spread out, snipers picked them off one by one. Sergeant Amy Parker led a team of 8 soldiers in holding a critical intersection. They had fortified a building with sandbags and reinforced the walls with mining equipment. When a squad of 20 Cretharians approached, Amy's team waited until the last moment before opening fire. The battle was brutal. The Cretharians had better weapons, but the humans had better positions. Amy watched as her soldiers fought with everything they had. When their ammunition ran low, they switched to mining tools and construction equipment. One soldier named Jake Rivers actually killed a Cretharian with a mining drill when his rifle ran out of bullets. The fight lasted for 6 hours before the Cretharians finally broke through. By that time, 5 of Amy's 8 soldiers were dead or critically wounded. She ordered the survivors to retreat through a maintenance tunnel while she stayed behind to cover them. The last thing Amy saw before the tunnel collapsed was a wall of Cretharian soldiers charging toward her position. She smiled grimly and kept firing until her rifle finally clicked empty. Lieutenant Danny Cole had been wounded 3 more times since the battle began. His left arm was broken. His right leg could barely support his weight. Blood soaked through his uniform. But he still held his position at a choke point that led to the civilian shelters. 7 other soldiers fought beside him. They knew they were the last line of defense. If the Cretharians got past them, the civilians below would be discovered. "I count 50 hostiles approaching." One soldier shouted. "Let them come," Danny replied. His voice was weak, but his grip on his weapon was steady. The Cretharians attacked in a coordinated assault. They used their plasma weapons to suppress the human positions, while their soldiers advanced. Danny's team fought back with everything they had. Bullets, grenades, even thrown debris. Anything to slow the enemy down. One by one, Danny's soldiers fell, but they took Cretharian warriors with them. For every human who died, 3 or 4 aliens fell as well. Danny was the last one standing when the Cretharians finally broke through. He had killed 12 enemy soldiers himself, though he could barely see through the blood in his eyes. A Cretharian warrior approached him, weapon raised. "You should have surrendered," the alien said in broken English. Danny laughed, though it hurt to do so. "We don't know how to do that." The Cretharian fired and Danny Cole fell, but he had held the position for 6 hours. The civilians below were still safe. In Danny's mind, that was enough. By the end of the 3rd day, the battle was effectively over. The Cretharians controlled most of the surface colony. Only 17 human soldiers were still alive, scattered throughout the ruins. But the cost had been terrible. Commander Vexthor walked through the destroyed colony in disbelief. Bodies of Cretharian warriors lay everywhere. Buildings were collapsed. Streets were cratered from explosions. His medical officers reported over 800 casualties, with 300 confirmed dead. 800 casualties against 43 human soldiers. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It should not have been possible. Vexthor found Kyle Morrison in the ruins of the command center. The human was barely conscious, his body broken in multiple places. But when Cretharian soldiers pulled him from the rubble, Kyle's eyes were still open, still defiant. "Why?" Vexthor demanded. "You knew you could not win. Why did you fight?" Kyle coughed and blood came from his mouth, but he managed to smile. "Because those people down there trusted us to protect them. We don't abandon people who trust us." "That is illogical," Vexthor said. "You threw away your lives for nothing." "Not for nothing," Kyle replied. "They're still alive, aren't they?" Vexthor had no answer for that. He ordered his soldiers to take Kyle as a prisoner and moved on through the ruins. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of human determination. Positions that had been held long past the point of reason. Weapons that had been used until they literally broke. Bodies that had fought until there was nothing left to fight with. These humans were not warriors in the Cretharian sense. They were not bred for battle. They were not trained from childhood to fight, but they had fought anyway. And they had made the mighty Cretharian Empire pay in blood for every meter of ground. For the first time in his military career, Commander Vexthor felt something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling. It was respect. Kyle Morrison woke up in pain. Every part of his body hurt. His left arm was in some kind of metal brace. His ribs felt like they were on fire. When he tried to move, restraints held him in place. He was in a Cretharian medical facility. The ceiling was too high, built for creatures much larger than humans. Strange equipment surrounded his bed, beeping and humming with alien sounds. 2 Cretharian guards stood by the door, watching him with their cold reptilian eyes. The door opened, and Commander Vexthor entered. The Cretharian leader looked tired, his scales less bright than before. He carried a datapad in one of his hands. "You are awake," Vexthor said. It was not a question. Kyle said nothing. He just watched the alien commander with steady eyes. Vexthor pulled up a chair, though it was too large for human proportions. He sat down heavily. "I have been studying your species," he said, "trying to understand what happened over the past 3 days. "We fought," Kyle replied simply. "That is what happened." "No," Vexthor shook his head. "Fighting is common. Every species fights when threatened. But what you did was different. You fought past the point of reason. Past the point of survival. Why?" Kyle was quiet for a moment. His throat was dry and speaking hurt, but he forced the words out. "You think we are weak because we break easily. You are weak," Vexthor said. "I have seen the statistics. Human bones break under pressure that a Cretharian child could withstand. Your muscles are inefficient. Your organs are fragile. You require constant maintenance just to survive. These are facts." "Yes," Kyle agreed. "We are fragile. Every human knows this from the time we are children. We know we can die from a fall, from a disease, from 1,000 stupid accidents. We grow up knowing how easy it is to die. Then why fight at all?" Vexthor demanded. "Why not surrender and live?" Kyle met the alien's eyes. "Because we have already made peace with dying. Every day we wake up knowing we might not see tomorrow. That is what it means to be human. We are afraid, Commander. We are afraid all the time. But we do not let fear control us. That makes no sense. You were bred for war," Kyle continued. "Your species is strong. You do not know what it is like to be weak, but we do. And because we know weakness, we understand strength differently than you do." Vexthor leaned forward. "Explain." "Strength is not about how much you can lift or how many wounds you can survive," Kyle said. "Strength is about what you choose to fight for, even when you know you will lose. Those people in the shelters below, they trusted us to protect them. Children trusted us. Parents trusted us. That trust is not something we can abandon just because the odds are bad." The Cretharian commander was silent. He looked down at his datapad, scrolling through information he had gathered about humanity. He had read about human history, about their wars, about how they survived on a planet that seemed designed to kill them. Humans had no natural weapons. They were slower than most predators. They could not survive extreme temperatures. By all rights, they should have been prey animals, hunted to extinction long ago. But instead, they had become the dominant species on their planet. They had conquered their world not through strength, but through determination. Through the ability to keep trying even after failure. Through the refusal to give up. "I have been a soldier for 40 years, Vexthor said quietly. "I have conquered 7 star systems. I have never lost a battle. But I have also never seen anything like what your soldiers did over the past 3 days." Kyle tried to shrug, but the restraints prevented it. "We did what we had to do." Over the next 2 days, Vexthor continued his study of humanity. He reviewed footage from the battle, watching how human soldiers fought. He saw Sergeant Amy Parker drag wounded soldiers to safety while under fire. He saw Danny Cole hold his position for 6 hours with injuries that should have killed him. He saw Jake Rivers use a mining drill as a weapon when his rifle ran out of ammunition. But what disturbed Vexthor most was the audio recordings. The Critharians had intercepted human communications during the battle. Vexthor listened to them now, trying to understand. In one recording, a human soldier was trapped under rubble, badly wounded. Another soldier was with her, trying to free her while enemy fire rained down around them. "Leave me," the wounded soldier said. "Get to safety." "Not happening," the other soldier replied. "Nobody gets left behind. That's an order. Then court-martial me later. I'm getting you out." They both died when the building collapsed. But they died together. In another recording, a group of human soldiers was surrounded. They were out of ammunition and had no chance of escape. One of them started singing an old Earth song, something about staying together through hard times. The others joined in. They sang until the Critharian soldiers broke through their position. The Critharians fought because they were ordered to fight, because it was their duty, because it was what they had been trained to do since birth. But these humans fought for something else. They fought for each other. Vexthor walked through the ruined colony past the bodies of his own soldiers. 800 Critharian casualties. 800 warriors who had trained their entire lives for battle, killed by a group of 43 humans who should have been crushed in hours. He stopped at the intersection where Sergeant Amy Parker had made her last stand. Critharian blood stained the ground alongside human blood. Spent ammunition casings littered the street. The walls were scarred with plasma burns and bullet holes. A young Critharian soldier approached Vexthor. His name was Zenkor, and he had only recently completed his training. This was his first real battle. "Commander," Zenkor said hesitantly. "May I ask a question?" Vexthor nodded. Why did they fight so hard? They must have known they would lose. Vexthor thought about Kyle Morrison's words, about the human capacity to choose courage over survival, about a species that lived with fear every day but refused to let it control them. "Because they understood something we do not," Vexthor said finally. "They understood that some things are worth dying for." "Like what?" "Like keeping a promise. Like protecting people who trusted them. Like refusing to abandon their principles even when it would be easier to surrender." Zenkor looked confused. "But we are stronger than them. We have better weapons, better armor, better training." "Yes," Vexthor agreed. "We are stronger, but they are braver." The young soldier did not understand, but Vexthor could see that he was thinking about it. That was good. Thinking was something Critharian soldiers did not do enough. That evening, Vexthor received permission to enter the civilian shelters. His officers advised against it. The humans might attack him. They might try to take him hostage. But Vexthor needed to see these people, the ones the soldiers had died to protect. The shelters were deep underground, carved from solid rock. 400 civilians lived down here now, crammed into spaces meant for emergency use only. They had limited food, limited water, limited everything. But they were alive. When Vexthor entered, the civilians drew back in fear. Parents pulled their children close. Old people stared at him with expressions of hatred and defiance. But nobody ran. Nobody begged for mercy. An elderly woman stepped forward. Her hair was gray and her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Are you here to kill us now?" she asked. "No," Vexthor replied. "I am here to understand why your soldiers fought so hard to protect you." The woman studied him for a long moment. "You really don't know?" "No. Explain it to me." The woman's name was Patricia Hayes. She had been a teacher before the war came to Epsilon Prime. She had taught children about Earth history, about the struggles humanity had faced and overcome. "Sit down, Commander," Patricia said, "and I will tell you about what it means to be human." Patricia Hayes sat down on a makeshift bench in the shelter. Around her, human civilians watched nervously as their elderly teacher began to speak with the alien commander who had invaded their home. Children peeked out from behind their parents. Everyone was exhausted, hungry, and afraid, but Patricia was not afraid. She had lived 72 years, and she had seen too much of life to fear death. Commander Vexthor sat across from her, his massive frame making the small shelter feel even more cramped. His scales were dulled with dust and fatigue. He listened carefully as Patricia began to speak. "Do you know what makes humanity different, Commander?" Patricia asked. "It is not intelligence. Many species are intelligent. It is not adaptability. Many species can adapt. What makes us different is that we have nearly died out so many times, and we always find a way to survive." She gestured to the walls around them. On Earth, our homeworld, we faced extinction at least 6 times that we know of. Massive volcanic eruptions, ice ages, diseases that killed half our population, wars that nearly destroyed us. Each time we came close to vanishing forever. Each time we survived. Vexthor listened without interrupting. We survived because we learned to hope when there was no reason to hope. Patricia continued. We learned to rebuild when everything was destroyed. We learned to trust each other when trust was all we had left. That is the human way. We break, Commander. We break so easily, but we also put ourselves back together. Every single time. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, crept closer to listen. Her mother tried to pull her back, but Patricia waved her hand to say it was okay. Tell me about your wars, Vexthor said. I have read the historical data, but I do not understand it. You fought each other for thousands of years. You developed weapons that could destroy your entire planet. How did you survive your own violence? Patricia smiled sadly. We almost did not. There were times when we stood on the edge of destroying ourselves completely, but we learned something important. We learned that strength without wisdom leads to destruction. We learned that winning is not always the same as being right. She paused to gather her thoughts. In our oldest wars, we thought strength meant conquering others. We thought it meant taking what we wanted by force. But eventually we realized that real strength meant knowing when to stop fighting, knowing when to build instead of destroy, knowing when to forgive instead of seeking revenge. That sounds like weakness, Vexthor said, does it? Patricia replied. Commander, you came here with 6 warships and 3,000 soldiers. You expected to conquer this colony in a few hours. How long did it actually take? Vexthor did not answer. You are stronger than us, Patricia said. That is a fact. Your soldiers are bigger, tougher, better armed, but my people held you off for 3 days. Do you know why? They were willing to die, Vexthor said quietly. No, Patricia corrected him. They were willing to die for something. That is the difference. Any animal can fight when cornered. Any creature will defend itself when threatened. But humans fight for ideas, for principles, for each other. We fight for things that cannot be measured or weighed or counted. She gestured to the civilians around her. These people here, they trusted those soldiers to protect them. And those soldiers kept that trust even though it cost them everything. That is what makes us strong, Commander. Not our bodies, not our weapons, our bonds with each other. Vexthor thought about the recordings he had listened to, about the soldiers who sang together as they died, about Amy Parker staying behind to save others, about Danny Cole holding his position with 11 wounds because the people below depended on him. On your world, Patricia continued. Strength is something you are born with. You are bred for it, trained for it. You know you are strong, so you act with confidence. But we are not born strong. We have to choose to be strong every single day. And that choice, that decision to stand up even when we are afraid, that is our real power. A young man in the shelter spoke up. His name was Ben Graham, and he had lost his brother in the fighting above. They laughed at us, he said bitterly. Your soldiers laughed at us when they first arrived. They thought we were weak and pathetic. Vexthor turned to face him. Yes, we did laugh. We were wrong. The admission seemed to surprise the humans. Critharians did not usually admit mistakes. I have fought in 14 star systems, Vexthor continued. I have seen species that were stronger than yours. Species with natural armor, with venom, with abilities you cannot imagine. Some of them surrendered without a fight. Others fought but gave up when they realized they could not win. But your species is different. You do not know how to surrender. Because surrender means abandoning people who trust us, Patricia said. And we cannot live with ourselves if we do that. It is not about pride, Commander. It is about knowing who we are and what we stand for. Vexthor was quiet for a long time. He thought about his own species, about the Critharian Empire. They had conquered so many worlds. They had crushed so many civilizations. They were proud of their strength and their military achievements. But had they ever fought for anything beyond conquest? Had they ever held a position not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to? Had they ever valued anything more than victory? What will you do now? Patricia asked. Will you kill us? Enslave us? Take this colony by force? I do not know, Vexthor admitted. I came here expecting a simple conquest. Instead, I found something I do not fully understand. I need to report this to my superiors. He stood to leave, his massive form towering over the humans. But before he went, he looked back at Patricia. Your soldiers, he said. The ones who died. They will be remembered with honor in Cretharian records. They fought well. Patricia nodded. They did. But they did not fight for your honor or your records, Commander. They fought for the people in this room. Remember that when you make your report. Vexithor left the shelter and returned to his flagship. He spent the entire night preparing a message to send to Cretharian High Command. It was the most difficult message he had ever written. In the message, he described everything that had happened on Epsilon Prime. He detailed the casualties, the unexpected resistance, the human tactics. But he also included something no Cretharian officer had ever included in a military report before. He included his own doubts. We can conquer the humans, Vexthor wrote. Of that I have no question. We are stronger, more numerous, better equipped. But I question whether we should. These humans possess something we do not. They fight not just for survival, but for each other. They value loyalty and trust over victory. They would rather die with honor than live with shame. He paused, considering his next words carefully. If we go to war with humanity, we will win battles. We will destroy their colonies. We will break their fleets, but we will pay a price we may not be able to afford, because humans do not surrender when they are beaten. They fight until there is nothing left to fight with. And if we push them to that point, we may destroy ourselves in the process. Vexthor sent the message and waited. He knew it would cause controversy. Some officers would call him a coward. Others would demand his removal from command. But he had told the truth as he understood it. In the shelter below, Patricia Hayes gathered the children around her. They were scared and did not understand what was happening. So she did what she had always done. She taught them. Listen carefully, she said. What happened here over the past 3 days is important. Those soldiers who protected us, they showed the universe what it means to be human. They showed that we are not strong because we cannot be broken. We are strong because we can be broken and still choose to stand up. Remember that. No matter what happens next, remember that. The children listened, and Patricia hoped they would understand one day. The message from Commander Vexthor reached Cretharian High Command within 6 hours. Within 12 hours, it had been reviewed by the Military Council. Within 24 hours, it reached the desk of Supreme Commander Kaelvorn. The greatest military leader in Cretharian history, Kaelvorn was 70 years old, ancient by Cretharian standards. His scales had faded to a pale purple and his body bore scars from 100 battles. He had served in the military for 50 years. He had personally led the conquest of 7 star systems. He had written the tactical manuals that every Cretharian officer studied. He had never lost a battle, never retreated, never shown mercy to an enemy. He sat alone in his office, reading Vexthor's message for the 3rd time. His hands trembled slightly as he held the datapad. Impossible, he muttered. This cannot be accurate. But he knew Vexthor. The commander was young but capable. He did not exaggerate. He did not lie. If Vexthor said that 43 humans had held off 3,000 Cretharian soldiers for 3 days, then it was true. Kaelvorn accessed the full military records from Epsilon Prime. He watched the battle footage. He listened to the intercepted human communications. He read the casualty reports. 800 Cretharian casualties against 43 human defenders. The numbers were devastating, but they were also real. For 3 days, Kaelvorn studied everything the Cretharian Empire had gathered about humanity. He read their history going back thousands of years. He learned about their wars, their struggles, their near extinctions. He read human literature, their poetry, their philosophy. He studied their music, their art, their culture. He learned about a species that should have been prey animals but instead became explorers. He learned about creatures so fragile they could die from a simple fall. Yet they climbed the highest mountains on their planet for no reason except to see what was at the top. He learned about beings who knew they would die, but built civilizations that would last beyond their lifetimes. On the 4th day, Kaelvorn requested access to the recorded messages from the human soldiers who had died defending Epsilon Prime. Each soldier had been carrying a personal recording device, standard equipment for human military personnel. The Cretharians had recovered these devices from the bodies. Kaelvorn listened to all of them. One soldier, a young man named Jake Rivers, had recorded a message to his family just before the battle began. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. Mom, Dad, if you are hearing this, it means I did not make it. I want you to know that I am not afraid. I am exactly where I chose to be, doing exactly what I believe is right. There are 2,000 people here who need protection, and I am honored to be one of the people protecting them. Tell my little sister that I love her. Tell her to be brave like we talked about. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. I love you all." The message ended. Jake Rivers had died 6 hours later, killed while defending a supply depot that protected the civilian food stores. Another recording came from Sergeant Amy Parker. She had recorded her message during a brief moment of calm in the second day of fighting. "To whoever finds this, we have been fighting for 36 hours. We have lost 19 people. The rest of us are wounded, exhausted, and running out of supplies. We probably will not survive another day, but the civilians are still safe. The shelters are still secure. We did our job. We kept our promise. That is all that matters." Amy Parker had died holding an intersection, buying time for wounded soldiers to escape. She had been found with an empty rifle in her hands, surrounded by bodies of Cretharian soldiers. Kael'Vorn listened to every recording, every last word from every human soldier who had died on Epsilon Prime. Some of the messages were long, some were just a few sentences, but they all said the same thing in different ways. "We chose this, we are not afraid, we kept our promise." By the time he finished listening, something had broken inside Kael'Vorn's chest. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, not in 50 years of warfare. It took him several minutes to recognize what it was. Grief. He was grieving for an enemy he had never met. These humans had been his enemies. They had killed hundreds of his soldiers. They had resisted the Cretharian Empire. By all rights, he should have felt anger toward them. Hatred, a desire for revenge, but instead he felt only respect and sadness, and something else he could not quite name. Kael'Vorn called an emergency session of the War Council. Every high-ranking Cretharian officer was summoned to the capital. They arrived expecting orders for a full-scale invasion of human space. They expected to hear plans for crushing this upstart species that had dared to resist. Instead, they found their supreme commander standing before a massive display screen. On the screen were 43 photographs, the faces of every human soldier who had died defending Epsilon Prime. "Look at them," Kael'Vorn said. His voice was quiet but carried through the entire chamber. "Look at their faces." The War Council looked. They saw humans of all ages, young soldiers barely out of training, older veterans with tired eyes, men and women, people who looked like they could have been teachers or farmers or artists in another life. "These 43 humans held off 3,000 of our finest warriors for 3 days, Kael'Vorn continued. "They inflicted 800 casualties on our forces. They did this with inferior weapons, inferior armor, and inferior numbers." "How?" Nobody answered. "I will tell you how," Kael'Vorn said. "They did it because they were fighting for something greater than themselves. They were fighting for the people who trusted them, for the children in the shelters below, for the idea that promises should be kept even when keeping them costs everything." He brought up new images on the screen, video footage from the battle. Human soldiers fighting against impossible odds, dying in defense of positions that had no strategic value, except that civilians depended on them. "I have led this empire's military for 50 years, Kael'Vorn said. "I have conquered 7 star systems personally. I have commanded 372 successful engagements. I have killed more enemies than I can count, and I believed, truly believed, that we were strong because we were unstoppable." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong." The War Council shifted uncomfortably. They had never heard their Supreme Commander speak like this. "We are not strong," Kael'Vorn continued. "We are simply numerous and well-armed. These humans showed more courage in 72 hours than I have seen in a lifetime of warfare. They fought not because they were bred for it, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in something greater than survival." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "They fought for loyalty, for trust, for love, for all the things we have forgotten in our pursuit of conquest." Supreme Commander Kael'Vorn turned to face the War Council directly, and in that moment, in front of the entire military leadership of the Cretharian Empire, he did something no Cretharian warrior had done in recorded history. He wept. Tears fell from his eyes, running down his scarred face. His body shook with emotion he could no longer control. The War Council watched in stunned silence as their greatest military leader cried for an enemy species. "If we go to war with humanity," Kael'Vorn said through his tears, We will win battles. We will destroy their colonies. We will break their fleets. But we will not conquer them. Because you cannot conquer a species that defines itself by its refusal to surrender. You can only destroy them completely. He looked at each member of the War Council. And if we do that, if we commit genocide against a species whose only crime was defending their own people, then we prove that humanity was always better than us, stronger than us, because they would die for their principles, and we would kill for our ambition. The chamber was silent. Nobody knew what to say. This was unprecedented, unthinkable. I am issuing the following orders, Kylvorn said, his voice growing steady again. All Cretharian forces will withdraw from human space immediately. We will pay reparations to the survivors of Epsilon Prime. We will return the bodies of all fallen human soldiers to their families with full military honors, and we will offer humanity a treaty of peace and mutual respect. Supreme Commander, one officer protested, the Empire has never retreated, never paid reparations, never offered peace as equals. Then it is time we learned, Kylvorn replied. The humans taught me something I should have known all along. True strength is not about how many battles you win. It is about knowing which battles are worth fighting. And this one is not worth what it would cost us. He turned back to the photographs on the screen. 43 faces looking out at the Cretharian War Council. These humans deserve our respect, Kylvorn said softly. They earned it with their courage. They earned it with their sacrifice. And they earned it by showing us what we have become in our pursuit of power. The orders were issued that day. Within a week, all Cretharian forces had withdrawn from human space. Within a month, the first diplomatic envoys were exchanged. Within a year, a formal treaty was signed. On Earth, Kyle Morrison recovered from his injuries in a military hospital. He had survived, though barely. When he heard about the Cretharian withdrawal and the peace treaty, he could barely believe it.